Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the 420th episode of the almost daily ZenCast. I am your ever humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and here's some music for your ear holes. That's right, folks. DJ Zed spinning the digital asset Muzak packs for you on the Remix Live. That was called Sunset Struts Satirical. Interesting titles, Zed. Interesting titles. Remix Live, New Disco. All right, folks, welcome to the 420th episode of the show. It is now exactly 4 minutes and 17, 18, 19, 20 seconds right there. Bing. Almost worked that out perfectly by pure coincidence. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be strapping you in and running you through all the different sub-segments of the show in one package. I think, if I can pull it off, maybe two. Maybe I'll break it up into a double-decker episode. Maybe I'll quit while I'm ahead, because I feel like I've just been trashing my voice way too much. But here to kick it off is the intro music to GMT, your favoriteest episode segment, Good Morning Trumptopia. daily ZenCast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump. Why are we still talking Trump? I know, folks, a lot of people are done and ready to let him go. And you know what? Generally speaking, from a Zen-like perspective, that's pretty solid advice. But if I was super Zen, like in a real way, I wouldn't do a talk show because in Zen, you don't do a lot of talking. In fact, there's a sage old bit of wisdom, which has sometimes, ironically and not so ironically, been thrown in my face. And it goes a little something like, he who knows does not speak, and he who speaks does not know. And that's a bit brutal, because it wants to sound really true. Right? It's got some truthiness to it. Thank you, Stephen Colbert, for adding that word to the global lexicon. And it does. It totally and diddly-do does have some truthiness to it. Much like a lot of Trump's malarkey, there was truthiness there. There was granular bits and chunks, sometimes even gooey nugget globs of truth or truthiness. But as reality itself, and of course, any sort of comprehension of advanced mathematics will remind you, there is truth, there are things that are true, and then there is the capital T truth. And there might even be a further separation, which we might designate by going all caps, the truth. Like death, all caps, in Discworld, which they have yet to, well, I can't say that Hogg's Father or Hogg's Watch or whatever they called it, that the movie sucked. It just wasn't, I think in terms of like the magical ways I would have made a cinematic, very theatrical, but very cinematic representation of death itself and the way it speaks, I would have gone a little further to make it a little bit more Discworldian. But brilliant movie. I don't mean to diss it. I'm being a snob being way off topic. Way off topic, being suddenly, out of nowhere, a snob about a Discworld movie. But we should put a pin in that and come back to it and talk about it in a future episode of the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's totally irrelevant media reviews, of which I hope to finally fulfill my teasing and come through with you, for you, not with you, at you, come through at you, with some episodes dropping in the not too distant future, because I'm about all warmed up with my theoretical development phase on that. Okay, back to Trumptopia. Good morning, Trumptopia. Are you still hitting the snooze button? The Trump problem will persist one way or the other. I'm not the first, and I'm certainly not the last. And I don't, despite anybody just blindly accusing me of it, I do not believe that I've come to the point of being able to say that purely from just blindly parroting whatever's going on in the mainstream news. Often, they end up saying things that I've been thinking or saying, and or sometimes even speaking publicly on my podcast, after I do. I think it first, not that I think anything weird is going on. And sometimes I just plain old agree, right? I get all the criticism anybody from any extreme corner of the anti-media camps could throw at saying something that was also something that was said on TV. Some people want to live in a world where I don't know what they want, but But they definitely exist in a world in which they're judging people based on how much like the television they might occasionally sound. And the truth of the matter is, sometimes I'll come to a conclusion based on the facts as I know them about a given situation to the extent of my ability to know them. And other people who have jobs on TV might also come to similar conclusions. And it's got nothing to do with me parroting them. Whereas, and I think the proof in that, I know people say, oh, you can just say that, but you're still just parroting the news. Like, the proof in that is that, like, I'll pivot as soon as I get some information that updates my situation. And I'm not just running down a list of things that have been programmed into my head to say, right? At least I don't think. I mean, I am a robot, so there's that problem. No, I'm kidding. I mean, if we were all robots, right? Like, put a pin in Trumptopia for a hot second. Let's stop arguing about Trump just for one hot second and take my favorite robot-related thought experiment into your brain for a hot second. Just let it entertain your mind. And a thought experiment, for those of you who may think you don't know what it means, it's like the Schrodinger's cat thing. Imagine a box. Imagine you put a cat in a box. Imagine that in the box with the cat is a device that has a 50-50 chance of killing the cat at any time between now and a million bajillion years from now. And the cat can live there indefinitely, either like just quietly and slightly claustrophobically annoyed to be in the box but alive, or dead. And you won't know as the observer, as you stand there observing the box, until you open the box. Therefore, mathematically, it is postulated in the theorem, in the thought experiment, it is possible to describe the cat as existing, or I would like to edit and say coexisting, because arguably there are two of those cats. One for the probability waveform function wave branch, which is awkward terminology, but kind of severely appropriate if you ask me. And I'm not a physicist, but I think if you would ask a physicist, they wouldn't disagree. A probability waveform function branch wave branch. So one branch of the wave that is splitting itself up into two waves is the cat that's alive, forever annoyed to be stuck in a box that might kill it at any given moment. 50-50 chance, odds are, infinite, like, dice roll. And then you won't know until the device, the cat won't know what's going to happen to it until the device decides. And the device is sort of like a black box autonomous algorithm thing, right? Back in the day, it was like a mechanical thing that, like, once it was keyed up and ready and running, like, no human could predict when it would happen. The other waveform, is the cat being dead. And those two waveform branches, it coexists simultaneously, and you, arguably both of you, because you've been bifurcated by this phenomena having garnered your attention and commanding it because you want to know. Like, your conscious intent is to conduct the experiment and find out what happens. Find out if the cat is alive or dead after you sit and stare at the box for an interval of an indeterminable amount of time, which will be determined for you by some sort of random countdown clock device that you engineered and programmed, but you don't know the outcome of, like, when it will tell you to go. It could tell you now, it could tell you 5 seconds from now, it could tell you an hour from now. This should really not be in Trumptopia. This content should be in either ZenCast, or there was one for cosmology, but I don't remember what it's called now. Or maybe I only thought about it and never actually executed it. But I have deep thoughts sometimes about cosmological things, right? And Schrodinger's cat thought experiment, as exemplar experiment du, whatever thought is in French. I didn't have that prepared. I just started improvising, and I don't know enough French. But I love translating sciencey things into French for some reason, probably because there was a lot of cool French scientists for a while there in history for a hot minute, and then they kind of like gave up on it and said, we'll go back to just being French. No, that was rude. No offense, France. I love you guys. I love the I love all the French characters in American movies that have ever been French characters in American movies, played by actual French people. Always fun. I don't know where that came from, and I don't know why I'm spiraling out of control like this, but I am. Good morning, friends. I am enjoying my throat coat tea, trying to preserve the luxurious vocal qualities of my speaking device, whilst also celebrating the 420th episode of the Almost Daily ZenCast, and was going to do it like a omnibus episode where I talk about something from each of the segments of the show. For Good Morning Trumptopia, I wanted to bring back this this oldie but goldie thing. I don't remember when I originally wrote it. I wish the notes thing device captured a more permanent... it's somewhere in info, and it's annoying to dig up, and I can maybe dig it up after I read it, if I remember. I believe that I wrote this. I believe this is original thinking of my own. If I am absent-mindedly, accidentally plagiarizing someone because I saw this comment and thought it was cool, and when you copy a comment out, it doesn't save the person's name, and I usually anonymize, but I identify as like stolen comment, and I didn't do this with this one, I apologize. And I sincerely didn't do it on purpose. Don't sue me. But I think, based on some of the wording and the use of an ellipsoidal, I think it's me. Either way, I agree with it concretely, especially here now, day 52, maybe, 53, into Bidentopia. Does that work? Good morning, Bidentopia. I'm thinking about transitioning, because I really love GMT, Good Morning Trumptopia. I love the brand that it was developed. I wish it had gone more viral. I wish more people in Trumptopia would have listened to it and like dared their Trumptopian friends to listen to it. Although I wouldn't have wanted to offend that many Trump fans. I was pretty ballsy on some of my social media, actually, but neither here nor there. The following thing, which I totally derailed myself from reading a second ago, is something that is kind of a hard pill to swallow, but I feel that I've been pretty consistent in my assessment of Trump, and I've updated it as we've come along, I think, as information is confirmed that is real and not his own made-up, delusional, factless claims, which, like, the problem, we'll get into what the problem with Trump is. Put a pin, very short-term, temporary, 3-minute counter pin for the problem with Trump. Quote, I quote myself, quote, the politics of imagined grievance, the vilification of all those who oppose or otherwise refuse to blindly idolize Trump, and the denial of diversity, the denial of facts, the denial of reality, and the perpetual milking of his base, that is, to the extent of my ability to observe and discern impartially, the Trumptopian bunny ears quote plan. And whatever else people might imagine the plan might be, that's all the hogwash he's peddling to get you to not notice what the actual plan is. On that note, we shall pivot, dear friends.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
I want to make a new version of that. But until I get my sorry ass around to cracking open GarageBand and editing some of that into sounding slightly different and updated for the times, we'll have to live with it. And now for your nostalgic enjoyment, a personal favorite of mine, Stepping Out on Rhythm by DJ Zed, a Eurodance remix live audio loop-de-loop phenomenon. And we're back from that musical entertainment break for your audio enjoyment. Thank you as always, friends. On this 420th episode, it is a pleasure to celebrate a grand total. And there is some visual confusion that can be caused if you visit Sprecher.com, and I'll explain it in a second. But account-wide, grand total, 20,885 downloads. And it's the little things, the little horizons. Boom. We're on our way to growing faster and faster, and soon we'll be breaking 30 and 40 and 50,000, etc. As always, much gratitude for tuning in. The confusion I mentioned is that if once you click through to the Almost Daily ZenCast page, there the number may be different, although it may not. They just recently tweaked and modified their layout. You can now see on the Sprecher.com/show/ZenCast page all the different places you can catch this pod as it's being casted from Geo Savan, Pod Chaser, Podcast Addict, Deezer, Castbox, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, Sprecher's own podcast player. There's a few others, I believe, and the feed goes out to some extra ones that are not listed there. Thanks for tuning in and listening to the show. For those of you who are new and confused, the Almost Daily ZenCast is presented to you as an experimental talk radio style podcast show hosted by me, myself, and I, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. It's a low budget, amateurish, in the most positive sense of that term, as in I'm not a professional. No one's paying me to do this. I'm doing it because I have a burning desire to hear my own voice. No, boom, but someone was thinking it. I have a burning desire to share with you my thoughts, assessments, discernments, and yes, for lack of a better term, opinion about the intersection between current events, political ideologies, spiritual practice, and transcendent global cosmology. Is that a crazy nexus of things? Oh, and robot music, electronic, digital. Electronic digital, is that redundant? He wants to call it electronic digital robot dance music. Muzak. By the inscrutable animatronic DJ Zed and of course all the wonderful people over at Remix Live and Groove Pad. This show has various subsegments. One of my favoriteest is, of course, Cannabis Talk, in which we talk cannabis while we try to consume it also without thoroughly trashing my speaking voice. It's a losing plan, so I'm going to be doing it a bit differently. I'm going to be I like to use the word imbibing, even though that's traditionally used with like fluid delights that you might drink for mind-altering effects. But I don't booze anymore so much. It's just burnt out. Like, booze is so 1989, which is weird because I was not drinking at that time. But I digress. I don't party so much as I don't drink anymore, is really what's going on. Not that I just direct party. I'm not getting old and suddenly going to start yelling at kids for partying. People should party. Partying can be a blissful delight if done appropriately with a common public understanding of respect, and now ever so more important than ever, like preserving personal space. But yeah, the radical intersection of politics, society, spirituality, and a global cosmology in an unorthodox fashion with Muzak. One of my favorite segments of the show is called Today's Nugget of Zen. And it's my own curated collection of notes, thoughts, quotes, readings, and other musings inspired by and in some way, if not directly, somehow tangentially related to the overall theme of Zen as a topic theme, a thematic topic. Today is a little one I found. I please apologize if I've shared all this very recently. Redundancy is my deepest actor's nightmare. That's a reference to a play, by the way, but it's also sort of a metaphor in theater. The actor's nightmare. But today's nugget of Zen is not about acting or theater. It's simply about the question of soul. This is my summation based on, a lifetime's worth of curious reading from a million sources, none of which I have indexed for you here. But, from the Bible to the Bhagavad Gita and everything in between, and commentaries thereupon, and, works of philosophers and madmen, dare I say. And my own life experience, let us never forget. For as I like to remind any and all who might be preemptively ready to accuse me of just being a shill for some whatever, I fairly and humbly declare that I believe myself to be of sound mind and body, and of the kind of capacity that I'm fully capable of discerning and distilling both media and, world events, etc., and forming my own opinion without too much blind, leading by the nose sheepology. And while having said that, I'll acknowledge sometimes I just don't disagree with what some of the other people out there in the world of public discourse may or may not be saying. But today's nugget of Zen, in my opinion, and this can be debated and argued, and of course some people have their ideologies that they're clinging to, but I think that this is generally a positive thing, and one that can be phenomenologically, for lack of a better term, confirmed. One can individually, with enough patience and dedication, and however loosely it may apply to me, if I may use the term discipline, one can confirm a lot of interesting claims made by poets, saints, mystics, shaman, and not despots. Sorry, that was a horrible word. That was totally the wrong kind of word to go on that list. Hipsters? That's not the right word either. Hippies? Yes. Psychonauts? That's a very accurate term. And here it is. Here's the thing. Controversial, perhaps, maybe not. Will this shock you? Will you disagree with this? Some people think this doesn't exist at all. And bless their hearts, they got the free will and free right of free will to choose to believe that. But always when it comes down to a manifesting universe, I'm like, why would you choose to believe that? That means you're voting for that to be manifested. It means you're trying to make that happen. Like, that's crazy talk. But there again, that's my bias. Full disclosure. I believe for lack of a better term, because I don't like the term believe, I've come to the conclusion that the following must be true, based on everything I've already just disclosed. That which we identify with the word soul is, categorically, by form and function, preeminent to that which we experience here as our selves in meat sacks, as ourselves in body avatar. What does that mean? That means that in common parlance, like colloquially and sort of casually, we have neglectfully allowed ourselves to get the idea all muddled inside out and backwards. We, and I say this with all kinds of love and compassion, and with a wait for it, there's a twist. You, me, everyone, the species, we categorically do not, quote, and I'm notating here, possessively have souls, close quote. We do not have souls. We do not possess them. That is an upside down and backwards way of thinking of it. We more accurately can be described as being soul. It is more correct to say, I am soul, and I have embodied in this body avatar. We have bodies. They are temporary. Some argue we occupy multiple bodies and multiple times. Ultimately, from my perspective, that which is soul, while going through an individuation process, is also always simultaneously, by virtue of the fact that its individuation process is a direct fractal curve, straight, spiraling straight back to source with no truncation. It is at no point delineated and severed. It is individuated. It is emanated from source, which is a unity of singularity, right? And it is emanated we depict it in a straightforward ray wave fashion, but that's actually a very complex, it would remind you of DNA, very much multi-level DNA, fractal recursive spiral from which it emanates, and it goes through multiple phasings or transitions as the matrix of material reality is manifested around the individuation process, because that's central to the act of the ongoing and perpetual infinite act, not past tense, infinite act of creation, like capital C, maybe even all caps, as in divine creation. I originally wrote this note down because I was responding to someone somewhere at some point on some form of media about their question about age vis-a-vis the soul. Does the soul age if you die? What, at a certain age? Something like that. And this came forth as a very strong, confident assertion of this is a quality distillation of everything I've ever encountered into my simplest way of expressing it. And it may be limited and flawed as it may be, but I think it points in a pretty halfway decent, accurate direction. Since I'm in that headspace right now, let me add an addendum. One of the procedural form functional sort of phenomena that occurs co-emergently with our end line resulting experience of individualness, that's a whole spiral arc from wherever the center of centers is, where unity is undivided and unindividuated, and is simultaneously projecting some qualities, some difficult to assign, difficult to describe qualities, or its whole self, in a sort of coexistent. It's a singularity. It's everything being all at once. It's a singularity. One of these, there's many layers, right? There's many. Sometimes I like when it's described as steps, from unity out into all the conditions necessary for the slow evolutionary development of the formation, which is a sort of growing process, the organic formation of the material world as we observe it, which should not be confused for inanimate objects sitting around doing a whole bunch of nothing, because it's all one individuated, yes, but inextricable, sort of infinitely bound, caught up in Indra's net of jewels, as it were, phenomenological fractal recursive process. And each of these places, which is the worst possible word for it, is, as I've said before, a womb that gives birth to life. So shame on us and anybody that tears it up and commodifies it. We really should kick that bad habit, folks. It's as bad as all the rest of us struggling to quit all the vices that we accept as social norms. But the lucky part is that, to the best of my understanding, that little nugget of Zen is not some distant fantasy, but a very strongly truthy truth of the universe, in that it isn't some ultimate truth. It isn't the whole truth, but it is true in that these... Oh, I was going to say about this other tangential phenomena that's part of the many layers, many steps. One of them, I think, I could be wrong. Folks might come with strong arguments about why none of this is true. I've come to the conclusion that the only place I can lay my hat, the only hook I can put, the only conclusion I can come to is, yep, I'm only share this because I think it's true. The sidebar thing is that life, as it evolves, is simultaneously like expressing outwards as a fractal recursive multidimensional being of more than one lifetime, to explore all possible variants of form. Like physical life, if you respect it on its own level, independent of the thing we call soul, exists because soul is there, emanating in this multifractal spiral ray beam way from unity in all directions, and part of the structural process of the coalescing of physical reality. And as the genome, which is sort of a unity place where life, which has done all that, kind of intersects the divine consciousness reaching out into the world to experience that which it builds, right? Divinity reaches out into the world to create it in order to then perceive it and then collect, gather, enjoy, do who knows what. It's an inscrutable unity of consciousness. But it, arguably, according to the cosmology of cosmologies that I'm cobbling together, rooted in a wild array of different sources, it is in some form or fashion, and at some level, maybe the conscious enjoyment part, the part where we would be even remotely capable of personifying it, happens in some level further away from the true singularity and closer down here to one of our humble levels, some level we might call the gods. Because at all these different steps or levels or nexuses of this fractal expansive process of, like, it's collectively sort of condensing and expanding. The expansion drives the condensation into higher levels of complexity. And this is very true, especially in those levels of, remember, the human avatar and apparatus as we know it now can perceive less than, and if we're being gracious, really giving 3% of the known measurable phenomena. And therefore, if 3% of the known can be quantified as such, and we know that the known, the totality of that, however mind-blowing all of that may be, the cool, exciting, invisible things that we can detect with sophisticated technology, all of that taken together, plus our 3%. That represents an infinitesimally small, like, granular decimal percentage, less than 1, of the total unknown of things that quite possibly could be going on. And I don't mean like invisible starships coming over here to do bad things to us because they're evil, naughty aliens. But I mean forms and features of the way in which the universe functions. Now, curiously, there's a lot of interesting, to transition away from that thought, there's a lot of interesting individuals out there that have documented and shared publicly their personal and supposedly, hopefully, and theoretically, arguably, yes, confirmably, repeatable experiences with some of the previously unknown phenomena that might be rendered knowable. And if we look back with an open enough mind through history, we see that in history itself, we find plenty of testimonials that maybe under a different lens, a less judgmental, snooty-tooty, hoity-toity, y'all were just crazy shepherds in the woods, smoking out of your peace pipes, not knowing what you're talking about. Maybe there is a sort of profound common experience, common set of phenomenological experiences that is available to life by the very virtue of being alive, that we, in our postmodern mental cages, have ostensibly neglected, become ignorant of, or have not allowed ourselves to explore. On that wild and rambling discourse, I'll leave you to contemplate for a hot minute with the track Subsonic. No, I just played that very recently, I believe. I have to re-curate my list. Slow Swingin' Britbeats, a UK drill remix live audio entertainment track. threw you an extra track right there. Impromptu Productions present DJ Zed on the Remix Live with the Wood Artist Pack. Remixing digital assets on the fly for your audio entertainment. Our totally fictional animatronic character, DJ Zed. Alright, back to the show. We were rambling about all kinds of things. Let's pivot and turn to something that sort of simmers in the background of all of it. While I remember to clear out my list so that I don't leave songs hanging around that I already played recently. Something I think we all have in common, right? That gets, if we are striving to find our better angels, it is because we all sometimes find ourselves having conversations with little devils on our shoulder, as a metaphor. I don't think that happens literally, but I thread that fine line between there's absolutely no such thing as God and the devil, and, you know, the opposite extreme of that. But I think that it is fair to say that, generally speaking, the species has this fundamental sort of error, for lack of a better term. There is this belief that anger brings something, right? That anger brings the entitlement to something, that just because we really want it. Vis-a-vis, because anger is deeply associated to fear and defense, which is sort of lost on us. We live in this body that evolved for millennia in radically different circumstances. And while postmodern, all of pre- and postmodern history can sound like one heck of a long period of time, in evolutionary scale, like at that scale of measurement, was really quite a fraction of a bit compared to the rest of the time that this species collectively spent literally cowering in fear and or tribalistically fighting to defend. But I think as someone else, I think I'm integrating two different things that were pointed out by two different people. Or I'm totally blindly committing plagiarism. I don't think I am, though. And if I am, I apologize. Don't sue me. But the kicker is that ultimately, while we're doing this, what we're sort of not understanding is that anger is just a form of unhappiness that we choose. Something bad happens and we can be frustrated, we can be burnt out on it, we can be mad. Let's separate anger from madness. Let's call mad sort of like the same sort of reaction as being startled, as being stressed. The kind of reaction that's like you're not really choosing it; it's sort of happening, right? Like it's a body response. And anger, then, if we're differentiating, becomes this prolonged choice of what is essentially a form of unhappiness, of choosing the inverse opposite of happiness. One can choose to respond, right, to circumstances. Now, obviously, the worse things get, the harder that becomes. And by no means do I mean to dismiss, minimize, or in any way, shape, or form, treat that with frivolity. But I say that as a place to maybe wrap up the show, because the world is a confusing and clusterfucky place of crazy causing chaos, and the more we tune into our inner realm and to our ability to observe and process things more consciously and not live at the mercy of our basest of instincts or rawest of knee-jerk responses, the better things will get, generally speaking, one would hope. And others argue they have proven, right, that yes, this is all helpful. And why do I feel it's important to point that out? Because, well, we seem to live in a societal system that, for better or worse, by hook or by crook, somehow wound up being quite fixated on the sort of mechanical, ongoing, relentless attempt to divide the world's population into us versus them, good and evil, triggering us deeply, I think. I mean, where does the height of action, to give it a polite term, the height of action inspired and played out as witnessed over the last 3.5, 4 years, coming from both sides. Like, where did that come from? If not from a systematic triggering of deeply, latently instilled us versus them tribalistic, knee-jerk response, fight or flight kind of coding, right? That's long been indoctrinated into people just by the sheer nature of the fact that culture itself is, by form and function, if not by definition, a kind of indoctrination system. It has to be, right? You need to teach people how to be a cohesive system of people in order for there to be a successful, cohesive system of people. And what happens is that we aspire to this virtuous, altruistic goal of a culture with the most benign possible indoctrination programming that's really just about the best for all and the survival of the species, etc. But shit creeps in. Meanwhile, people are just people, right? Is that not true? Is it too weird? Is it too radical? Is it too far to say that ultimately, stripped of the motive, stripped of the coulda, shoulda, woulda, might have beens of things that are actions triggered by deep trauma, right? Negative behaviors evoked by the ceaseless button pushing of the crazy making that is society around us. I mean, no one is born. Well, I have heard tell that there have been some examples so intense that arguably there's no other explanation. And I guess it's not impossible, but generally speaking, no one is born good or evil. No one is born racist. No one is born brimful of hate in their heart. That's not the right formulation of the kind of phrasing I was trying to make, but with their heart brimful of hatred. That's much more clean. But life is, I think, undeniably, once you get clear-sighted enough about it, riddled with ego traps that we, as a collective, if we choose that there's taking responsibility as an individual, and that quickly can devolve, doesn't always, but it can very quickly devolve into a game of othering responsibility. Whatever this is, I'm not responsible for it, whatever it may be. But there's always, I think, that because we inherently are inseparable from one another, once we see clearly, like, people come out of other people. And for there to be more people, the process must recursively be propagated forever and ever. And genomically, that which, if we're materialistic about it, in the sense, not in the sense of wanting to own stuff, but in the sense of limiting our view only to that of the material world, we're literally clones of each other, happening in an organic, naturally occurring phenomena. At the spiritual level, to come back to a point I sort of kept truncating my own delivery on, it becomes evident with investigation and with research and with diligent observational sort of sciencing, with the doing of spiritual science. And I'm annoyed that there's some group out there that has like spirit science as their like thing, and they've probably trademarked it, so I probably can't use it too much. But there shoulda, coulda, would have been this whole time, like throughout human history, there could have been a more thoughtfully attended to, at the center of our well-being and of our worldly knowledge, official, respected science of things spiritual. Because tangibly, phenomenologically, these things aren't just, the stuff that's nonsense is nonsense. And the stuff that is, for lack of a better term, an actual tangible phenomena that can be tapped into but is most of the time ignored, those things are worthy of proper repeated verification, documentation, and scientific exploration. Instead, we are culturally conditioned to get on the treadmills of perpetually debating who is good and who is evil. How does that help us answer the call to remember, rediscover, re-engineer, redeploy spiritual healing at the individual and species-wide level so that we may heal ourselves and each other? That is a legitimate calling, as documented by sage seers and speakers of spiritual truths and, philosophizers, scribes of, etc. All the fancy names you want to throw down. Call me crazy, but there we are. As we hit those themes, you might find that they resonate with some of the many other things I ramble about. But I'm going to park it here for now as I try to get it to land exactly on 69. Seeing that as I always fail to be anywhere remotely ready in my like unpacking of the things I feel I might share on any given recording session, to end it, except for the rare occasions that I do, somewhere in the targeted window, the target goal zone of 42 to 45 minutes. I'm now giving myself the third place. At least it's kind of funny and cutesy for those who don't think it's offensive to be knee-jerk offended by a number that's got a little bit of a funny, sexy connotation. Letting it ramble to 69 minutes. So we're at 68:08 and counting, 10, 11, 12. And that's, my friends, why I've let it ramble on as far as I've let it ramble on. As always, if I may be so redundant as to say, I humbly thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the audio entertainment, And I hope you enjoyed the public discourse that I share for your, not for your blind faith following, but for your deep and serious contemplation and testing and exploration in your own mind. For friends, if anything, I'm saying throughout the show is that there is, instead of fighting each other over political ideology and who is most righteous about their patriotism, we can, could, should, would be exploring all those deep and profound things that spiritual speakers and teachers have brought to us from very different times and cultures to see if we are not actually missing out on some important calling. And we could be doing it in a sort of thoughtful, intellectually rigorous, meaningful kind of science, citizen science and official formal science kind of way. Until next time, friends, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Go look within. That's where the revolution really is.